Happy coding.
Hey there, this is Kevin here yet again in our next video in our series on Intro to Web Dev. So I'm kind of rapid firing these. You would have just learned about for loops and arrays, and for loops let you repeat work. Arrays store repeated values, and they work really well together to minimize the amount of code that you have to write to process that data and output it to the page. And in this video, we're going to continue on that trend of dealing with data, and we're going to learn about a new type called objects. And objects let you store like related fields together, and they also work really great with arrays and for loops. So they all kind of smush together into this general idea of working with data in my brain. So yeah, I'm just going to dive in as I always do, not with a bunch of slides, but with diving into code. So I have my Scratch file here as I always do. And right now it doesn't really contain anything. I emptied it out since the last video. And the only thing it really has is this output UL element. And then it adds a single LI to it that just says hello world. And indeed, I see hello world in my page. And okay, so to talk about objects, I'm going to lead up to them by showing you, like, I don't know, the bad way of doing it, and then I'll get to the good way of doing it to sort of show you why objects are handy. So let's say that I wanted to store some data about people, about like, in this case, I'm going to choose like famous computer scientists, famous programmers or coders from the early days of programming. So I'm going to start with some variables. So I'll say like, I don't know, in this case, maybe I'll just say like first name 1 equals Ada. Let first name, or sorry, not first name, last name 1, 1 equals Lovelace. Ada Lovelace was, fun fact, the first programmer. And I'll say let birth year 1 equals, and she was born in 1815. Right now, if you're like, wait, the first programmer was born in 1815? How does that make sense? We didn't even have computers back then. Look her up. She's a super interesting person. But I will leave that as an exercise to the reader. So anyway, I have first name 1, last name 1, and birth year 1. Don't pay attention to the 1. It's because I'm going to add another one in a second. But for now, it's just first name, last name, and birth year. So I can output that to my page. I can say in here, this is getting a little messy, but I'll introduce some white space maybe. And I'll say, instead of having hello world here, I'll say first name 1, and then let's do it maybe this way. Sure. And again, JavaScript doesn't care about white space. This is mostly for me to be able to keep track of what I'm doing. And I'll have a space. I need a plus sign in there, don't I? And then I'll say plus last name 1, and then plus was born in, and then a plus, and then birth year 1. And the rest should work. Okay, so I'm saying output element dot inner HTML append this li tag with content of first name 1 space last name 1 was born in with spaces around it, birth year 1, and then I close out the li. So let's just see if that worked. Save that and refresh. And indeed, I see Ada Lovelace was born in 1815. Cool. And now let's say I wanted to add another person. So I could do that. I could say let first name 2 equals Grace. Let last name 2 equals Hopper. Grace Hopper, another very famous programmer. Let birth year 2. And I will admit that I don't remember when Grace Hopper was born. I feel deep shame at that. But another super interesting lady, look her up, 1906. Okay, 1906. And I could do a very similar thing. In this case, maybe, I don't know, maybe instead of writing it all out, I'll just copy paste it. Don't do this, but you know, I'm going to do it. First name 2, last name 2, and birth year 2. Okay, save that. Well, spell it right first and save that and refresh. And okay, I get Grace Hopper was born in 1906. And it's working because I'm just outputting it kind of directly in my JavaScript by building out my HTML tag this way. And sure, that works. And okay, let's say I wanted to add a third person. At this point, you might sort of start recognizing that we are going down a pattern, that there are better ways to do this. So, for example, what we just learned in the last couple of videos was for loops and arrays. So maybe let's try that. Instead of having first name 1, first name 2, last name 1, last name 2, maybe I'll have an array of first names, an array of last names, and an array of birth years. So I could do that. Let's try that. Let first names equals, and then some square brackets. And in this case, I want Ada and Grace. And let last names equals, and then an array. And I'll have Lovelace and Hopper. And close out my square bracket. And then finally, let birth years equals square bracket. Actually, I don't need, they're not strings, they're numbers. So 1815 and 1906, close out my square bracket and a semicolon. Now I can delete these. And I can, what? I could modify this code to be first names, first names, and then 0, and last names 0. But this is the pattern that we saw in the last video, that there's a better way to do this. So instead of having 0, 0, 0 here, and then 1, 1, 1 here, I'll instead use a for loop. So I will create my for loop. So I'll say for let index equals 0. Index is less than what? What do I want to use? In this case, you know, they all have the same length. So, okay, I'll just choose the first one, maybe. Less than first names dot length. And then finally, index plus plus. Close out my parenthesis, start a curly brace, give myself some white space, close out my curly brace. And I'll move this code into my curly brace. We're inside my for loop here. And so now what do I want? I want first names of index, last names of index, and birth years of index. And what this gives me is all of the output for all of the arrays in a for loop, without needing to have like a bunch of these blocks and then like fiddling with the indexes in each one. I'm using these multiple arrays to output my my content here. So let's refresh, and I'm always a little nervous, so I'm just going to type some nonsense here just to double confirm. Okay, cool, it's working. Get rid of my nonsense. And so I could add another person, but this is a little tricky because, like, I don't know, let's say I started adding some data here and I said like Alan, so Alan Turing is the next person I'm going to add, and I'm not quite done yet, so I'm going to hit save, but I'm going to refresh just to see what it does. And what? I get weird stuff. And this is really common. And in this case, you might check your JavaScript console and look for errors, but it's actually not really a error. It's actually like a logic error, I guess I would say, because it's not a problem in my syntax. I haven't typed anything that's illegal, but if I think about what my code is doing, I am saying I created an array called first names, and I give it Ada, Grace, and Alan. I create last names, Lovelace and Hopper, and I create birth years, 1815 and 1906. And then I jump down to my for loop here, and I say, I create an index variable, set it equal to 0, and I loop as many times as there are first names. So that's important because I have 3 first names. So let's say I get to my third last name, or first name, I mean, and so my array, my index is 2, so 0, 1, 2, and 2 is less than first names.length, because first names.length is 3, 2 is less than 3, cool. So I say output element.inner HTML equals first names of 2, which is Alan, and then I add last names of 2, which is what? Well, this is 0, this is 1, and there isn't a 2 in this array. And same thing with birth years. What is at index 2 in birth years? Well, there isn't one because this is 0, this is 1, and in this case, I would have to add them myself. And now we're back to this pattern of, wait, if I change code in one place, now I have to change it in another place, and that's really annoying. And this is actually a technique. What we're doing here is creating different arrays that hold like related data. This is called parallel arrays, and it works-ish, but it leads to problems like what I'm outlining here, where they can get out of sync. And like, let's say I had a bunch of values in here, and like I wanted to add one sort of in the middle. I'd have to do a lot of counting and be like, wait, where am I in this array? Okay, add it there. Where am I in this array? Okay, add it there. And it's just really kind of unwieldy. It will work, but there's, smarter ways to do it. Side note, I do encourage you to look up all these people. They're great. So what all of this is leading to is this idea of there are other ways to package up your data. And in this case, what we're leading to is this idea of objects. So I'm just going to create one. I'm going to say, I don't know, I'll call it Ada. Feels weird, but that's fine. So I'm creating a variable, and I'm going to set it equal to a new type. And this type is object. And an object can contain multiple fields, similar to an array in that sense, but in an object, instead of having indexes, so 0, 1, 2, 3, an object has fields, so like property names, which are a lot like variables. And so to define an object, I'm going to start with my curly brace, and I always give myself some white space and then close it out. And then inside of this, I'm going to give it my fields or my values, or my fields or my variables. So I'm going to say first name, and it's not an equal sign when you're inside of an object, it's a colon, and I'll say Ada, and then a comma, and then I'll say, I almost said second name, last name, colon, Lovelace, and then a comma, and then birth year, colon, and 1815. And I can put a comma here, kind of depends. I will choose not to this time. And okay, I'm going to kind of define all 3 of them before I do anything with them. And yeah, I'll do it that way. And so next I'll do Grace. So let Grace equals, and then my curly brace. And I will actually add a semicolon. You don't really need one technically, but I will be annoying and add one. So first name is Grace. Last name is Hopper. And let me scroll down a little bit. Okay, comma, and birth year is 1906. Okay, one more. I'll say let Alan equals, and curly brace, and first name colon is Alan. Last name colon is Turing. And finally, birth year is 1912, I think. I think that's right. Let's go with yes. Okay, so I have my people. I have Ada, Grace, and Alan. And they are these objects that contain 3 fields. And now, what I want to do, well, I could have a similar sort of output here where I'm going to ignore this for now. I'm sure this is temporary code, so I'm going to just give myself some white space. I could here say Ada dot first name. Sure, I'm going to do it this way for a second. Ada dot last name and Ada dot birth year, and maybe I'll comment out my for loop for now, or get rid of it. I'll comment it out. So I'm only adding one person to my output. Let me zoom out so you can kind of see what the whole thing looks like. And I'm going from the object. So this is just commented out. That doesn't do anything. So I create my three people, Ada, Grace, and Alan. They're these objects that all contain a first name, a last name, and a birth year. Okay. Then I get my output element and I say the output element that's inner HTML, which starts out as empty. I'm going to add an li with Ada. So this goes to the object Ada, which is, oh, it's annoying. There's two scroll bars. Goes to the object Ada and looks at her, or I shouldn't say her, it's a variable. It's first name field, which is Ada, then a space, and then Ada dot last name goes to this last name field, Lovelace, and Ada dot birth year goes to Ada's birth year, 1815. So now if I refresh, I should see only Ada Lovelace. And indeed I do. Cool. And I could, do this again, like output element.inner HTML plus equals blah, blah, blah. And now instead of Ada.first name, it's Grace.first name, Grace.last name, Grace.birth year. Could do the same thing with Alan. But again, maybe by now you're like, yes, that's the pattern that we shouldn't do because it's annoying. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an array, and my array will contain my objects. And then I'll use a for loop to loop through my array. And so let's see. So I'll say here, after I create my people, I'm going to create an array, and I'm going to say let, I could say people. I think I'm going to call it persons instead, just to kind of match how I name arrays, which is persons contains a person. And I'll set it equal to square brackets. And inside of my square brackets are my people. So I'm going to say Ada, comma, Grace, comma, Alan. So this little baby line of code is saying create an array that contains these objects, Ada, Grace, and Alan, and store that in a variable called persons. And that persons variable is an array. So now here I can say, I can actually just kind of steal this code. Sure, this is getting a little confusing. Maybe I should have just rewritten it from scratch each time, but that would take forever, and no one would enjoy that. So I'll go back to my array just to get the sort of the structure of it. And so now instead of first names, this is kind of my old code. I'm going to loop over persons. So persons.length, and instead of first names of index, I'm going to go to persons of index dot first name. And instead of last names of index, I'm going to go to persons index dot last name. And instead of birth years of index, I'm going to go to persons of index dot birth year. Okay, so now like sort of in totality, what I have is I create these three objects, Ada, Grace, and Alan. I store all of them in an array in the persons variable. I get my output element, and then I loop over my persons array, going to each element, Ada, Grace, and Alan, and I output that object into my page by adding the person at whichever index, 0, 1, 2 in this case, their first name, their last name, and their birth year. So if I save that and refresh, indeed, I do see Ada Lovelace, Grace Hopper, and Alan Turing. Okay, so that's kind of the payoff. I have this sort of complicated data, and it has multiple fields and multiple objects, and really, the only code I need to worry about is this. If I wanted to add more people, I could. Maybe I won't do that because it'll take more time than you feel like watching, but I could add another person and then add them to this array. I could also style them like I just did in the previous videos. So I'll say like li class equals, and then I don't know, person, and then I can go to my CSS and say dot person, and I'll give it, I don't know, I'm not being very interesting here, but I'll say like border, again, thin, solid, black, margin, 5 pixels. I always spell border wrong. Border, and then padding of also 5 pixels. And to do that, to change that line of code, I really only had to change that that styling for all 3 of these. I really only had to change this. I had to add some CSS, but in the sort of JavaScript itself, I didn't have to change it in 3 places. And you can imagine if I had 100 people, how much faster that would go. So a couple other things I'll show, like what I'm doing here is I'm defining each person in a named variable, and then I'm feeding them into the array. You can do that, but a more common approach, if you're just storing them directly in an array and you don't actually care about this variable, is you can store the objects directly in the array. So I'll do that by basically stealing the stuff that's like including the curly braces. So because Grace points to this whole thing, I can use this whole thing instead of Grace, and same for all of them. So I'll give myself some white space here. And so persons equals that. I'm going to be annoying about my white space. Sure. Grace is that. And a comma. Grace and white space. Oh my goodness. Sure. Comma. And finally Alan. So you'll often see data formatted like this, where you have an array of objects. And finally Alan, and he closes out here, and then my array closes out there. Okay. So again, this is very common where you have an array of objects, and that should still work. If I save and refresh, cool. Tempted to add another person just to show that that would work. And sure, you know what? And to be really annoying, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to add myself. I am a pioneering voice in computer science. So first name equals Kevin, comma, last name, colon, Workman, comma, and birth year, 1986. Super old, but hey, not as old as Ada Lovelace. Sorry, Ada. So if I save that and refresh, notice like I'm only changing it here. Well, I need a comma. I'm only changing it here. I'm not changing anything down here. I'm not messing with my HTML or my JavaScript. But if I refresh, there I get Kevin Workman was born in 1986. And that's the payoff. That's the power of all of the things that we've been learning. For loops, arrays, and now objects. You can store your data in a way that is easy to process, and you don't have to deal with a bunch of like copy pasting like this line of code 500 times. You can have a for loop that does the same thing for every element in an array, and those elements can be objects. So that is data in a nutshell. There's a bunch of things you can do from here. So for example, you can have like nested objects where you could have, I don't know, maybe I'll have like, I don't know, like studied. And in here, I can have like an array, for example, and I'll say here was like poetry, comma, logic, comma, the analytical engine, and this would work in the same way that I can store an array in a variable. I can store it in a field in an object. And then down here, I could do something with that array. I can maybe have another for loop that adds different data to the output, but you know, it all kinds of depends. So don't get caught off guard if you see like kind of nested structures in objects, because that that is a thing. And okay, so I think I'll leave it there. There's a bunch of stuff we could cover from here, but that'll get us pretty far for now. Maybe the very last thing I'll show you, which I meant to show you earlier, is in this for loop, what I have is a for loop that creates an index variable, and then I only ever really use my index variable as well, an index variable into an array. So when you have something like this, when you have this structure, it's very common to use a different kind of for loop where you don't create an index. And this is a for of loop. So this is for let person of persons. And now I don't have to use this index anymore. This is just a shortcut. So instead of needing to deal with the index, I just say, give me every person in the person's array. It's doing the same thing behind the scenes. It's like just going, up by one every time. But you don't have to care about that because you're just saying, oh, whoops, I need to change that. Person. So I say let person of persons, give me every person in persons. And then for every person, do the thing. In this case, output their first name, their last name, and their birth year. So if I save that and refresh, still works. So that's some a shortcut you might see. So if that syntax in a for loop is in a tutorial or something, that's what that's doing. So just an optional shortcut. You can go either way. All right, that's enough for me yammering on. I will stop. In the next video, we'll kind of smush all this together and start working on a project. But until then, thanks for watching, and as always, happy coding.